Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kiro Kalmasian. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Mohammad Marandi. He is a professor of English literature and Orientalism at Tehran University. He's a political analyst, and also he was the media advisor to Iran's nuclear negotiation team in 2022. Thank you very much, Dr. Marandi, for accepting my invitation and joining me on Syriana Analysis.
Thank you very much for having me.
Actually, the Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi arrived today in Damascus, and you are also in Damascus. And I would like to say welcome to your second home in Syria. And this visit is a two-day official visit, accompanied by a ministerial, political, and economic delegation to sign several agreements. The visit, actually hailed by the Syrian state media as historic, which comes after, quote, a strategic victory. You now accompany the Iranian delegation. What type of agreements will be signed? And if I want to play the devil's advocate, how is the visit can be considered historic and strategic victory when the U.S. still occupies 1/3 of the country, Turkey occupies Idlib and the north, and the country's economy is in ruins?
Well, first I'd like to say that the hotel that I'm staying in is a hotel that I've been in many times. And during the war, I recall that just outside the window of this hotel in, I think, late 2014, a shell struck the street and a soldier was killed. And he lied on the street right outside the hotel. And also I recall being at this hotel in April 2013. I don't want to name the hotel for now, although it's no big secret. But at that time there was the constant sound of artillery. And I recall, again, I think in late 2014, we were passing by Homs when there was a twin bombing. I saw the explosion. We were going towards the north, and a large number of people were killed. Now it is very peaceful, but the irony is that the suffering that we see today is, in my opinion, in many ways worse than during the dark days when Western countries and the regional allies, such as the Israeli regime, among others, were supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. The United States and Europeans have imposed very brutal sanctions. The Caesar Act, as you know very well, they are trying to strangle the population. People die as a result. Life is very difficult. And again, it's very strange because coming to Damascus now, you see a very different place. It's very quiet. It's things are very normal. When you look, from the window of the hotel or from the car, when you're walking down the streets. But when you see people, this war continues. It's being waged by different means and in a more barbaric manner because the whole of the country, including children, are being sanctioned. So that's something we have to remember. You're absolutely correct that the United States continues to occupy 1/3 of Syria. And that is, of course, the arrogance of empire. And the whole of the Western media and Western regimes, all of them assume that the United States and its allies have the right to have a presence there because they are not bound to international law. They are exceptional. They are superior to the rest of us in their own eyes. They are racially superior. Their civilization is superior in their eyes to the rest of us. And it doesn't matter whether these elites are woke or not. It makes no difference. They consider themselves to be above the law. And when they commit crimes against humanity, it is for them a necessary evil. If there are violations of international law, it is necessary. But if anyone else violates international law, then they are immediately condemned. However, I think that this is a historic moment, first of all, because in my opinion and from my understanding, the Iranians and Syrians have neglected the economic aspect of their relationship to a large degree. Unfortunately, during the past decade, over a decade actually, no Iranian president has visited Damascus. And that is something that should have, in my opinion, that should have happened years ago. But now the current president, Dr. Raisi, he is very keen on discussing with President Assad means through which the two countries can benefit from economic interaction, through business ties, through investment, joint investment, and so on. So I think this is the beginning of a new trend. It is also symbolic because the Iranian president has traveled to Syria through the international airport in Damascus. It is another sign of normalization, of normality in Syria. And it is, of course, symbolic in that it is, again, being stressed by the Iranians that we fully support the Syrian government at a time when we are seeing enormous changes in the region. We see a big shift in the way in which the Saudi government is treating its neighbors and countries across West Asia. The rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia is well underway. We are seeing positive signs in Yemen. We are seeing very positive signs in Syria as well. And it's, of course, not just the Saudis, it's the Emiratis, it's the Kuwaitis, and it's literally all the countries to the south of Syria that are changing their policy towards the country. So I think it is a sort of turning point. Of course, we can't see the future. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what will happen to the north of Syria, what sort of endgame there will be with regards to the Turkish occupation of the north and its support for al-Qaeda affiliates in that part of the country. But I think that it is becoming increasingly difficult for Turkey to maintain the status quo, especially because other countries are moving closer to Syria. Iran is developing its economic ties with Syria. Turkey has many problems at home. And if Turkey does ultimately change its policy, it becomes all the more difficult for the United States to continue with its illegal occupation and its support for extremist groups. Tribes that were part of ISIS are being trained by the United States. They're being used by the United States.
They're joining the SDF.
Absolutely. These are the same people who were carrying the black flags. They're not from another planet. They're not from another continent. They are from this country. They're the very same people. And the United States, they never discontinued their support for these terrorists. They've only changed the tag. But in any case, it is becoming already all the more difficult for the United States because of the rapprochement that we're seeing in West Asia, across West Asia. Hopefully it'll become more difficult. Economic and political and military ties that exist between Iran and Syria will continue to grow. So it is, I think, a symbolic moment, but when you look at it within the current context, I think it is historic too.
Dr. Marandi, one of the countries that fought against Syria in the past decade is Saudi Arabia. And one of the reasons that they fought against Syria was, they say, the Iranian influence in Syria. And Syria gave so much access to Iran in the region, and they have now enormous influence in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and in the region thanks to Syria. This is in their media, in their politicians. They said this in the past decade. Now, after the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, with the mediation of China. This tone has become a little bit more diplomatic, right? But at the same time, there is a big elephant in the room, and that is Israel. And they still talk about the Iranian influence in Syria, and they target Syria on a regular basis. They say they're targeting Iranian targets, etc., etc. If we want to be honest with our audience, what's the nature and the scope of the Iranian influence in Syria, and what the Iranian advisors, the military advisors, doing in Syria? Are they training Syrian forces? Are they training Lebanese Hezbollah? Are they training Palestinian factions in Syria? Because these advisors are also being targeted by the Israeli strikes, right? And some of them died on Syrian soil.
Well, there are a number of things that I think I have to point out. One is that the Iranian presence in Syria, militarily speaking, only began in mid-2013, after there were already tens of thousands of foreign fighters brought into the country from abroad, mostly from the north, from Turkey, but also from Jordan. So the United States, NATO, and its regional allies, the Israeli regime and countries in the Persian Gulf, they were tilting the balance of power by bringing in foreign fighters. If they hadn't brought in these tens of thousands of extremists, the Syrian army would have been able to maintain peace and control. It would have been a challenge, but they would have overcome it. So when the Iranians saw that there was basically a dirty war going on and non-Syrians were being used to lead the fight against the country, the Iranians and their allies, such as Hezbollah, Iraqis, and Afghanistani or Afghan volunteers, they began supporting the Syrian Arab Army. And then, of course, in 2015, General Soleimani went to Moscow. He convinced President Putin to join the fight, and the Russians came in with, and their air force had a major impact in decreasing casualties on the side of the legitimate government in Damascus and its allies that were all fighting ISIS and al-Qaeda together. So Iran wasn't in Syria or involved in Syria before 2013, and it came in at the request of the internationally recognized government in Damascus. I should also add that the relationship between Syria and Turkey, for example, economically was much closer than it was with Iran.
Yes.
Before the dirty war in Syria. So Iran had no problem with the family relationship between President Erdogan and President Assad, or the relationship between President Assad or any other country in the Persian Gulf region and beyond. It was only when they flipped and they tried to undermine the government in Syria and brought in foreign fighters under the leadership of Obama and the US government that the Iranians felt that they had no option but to enter Syria. But the Iranian presence after the war ended, after the fighting ended, the major fighting in the north, you're absolutely correct, of course. Turkey continues to occupy parts of the country with its al-Qaeda allies, and the United States continues to occupy roughly 1/3 of the country, the wealthiest part of the country when it comes to agriculture and oil. But the fighting has died down. Ever since the fighting died down, the Iranians decreased their presence because it is unnecessary to keep these troops here, or these advisors, or these people who were engaged in one form or another in the defense of Syria, because it's
does this also apply on Hezbollah?
Yes, all those who were as the situation normalizes, everyone wants to go home. The presence that continues to exist in Syria is a minimal one, and again, it is at the request of the Syrian government. It is to support Syria because Syria is under enormous pressure. And I should point out that when the earthquake happened in Syria, it was these allies that came to the aid of Syria. It was these forces, whether Iranian or Iraqi or Hezbollah or the Russians, and the Afghanistani people who were in Syria, that rushed to the assistance of the Syrian people. And Western countries literally boycotted Syria, and they only sent in real and meaningful support to Turkey. So those who remain here actually assisted the Syrian people during their time of need, not only during the war, but now during the earthquake and its aftermath. So the Iranian personnel that are here are limited. And I should point out that the Israeli regime often attacks Syrian Arab army positions and says that it's targeting Iranians. You often see, for example, air defense systems that are attacked by the Israeli regime. These have nothing to do with Iranians. In fact, if an Iranian is martyred, if an Iranian is murdered by the Israelis, it would come out in minutes because it would be all over the internet in Iran, in Telegram channels and online. You can't, if there's an Iranian soldier here who's murdered, you can't hide it. So the Israelis constantly say, for example, they attacked Iran, these positions, and then some body like the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is linked to Western intelligence agencies and based in, it used to be in Coventry, I don't know if it's still there now, near Birmingham, but it is, I think, one person, or it was one person.
It was a two-room apartment.
So they would say like 6 Iranians were killed, but they wouldn't name them. Where are they from? What city in Iran? Like, is it Mohammad Marandi from Tehran? Do you have a picture of him? It's just like 6 people. They don't provide evidence because it's mostly fake news. And recently, when an Iranian was murdered, the name came out immediately. So most of these attacks, overwhelmingly, these attacks target Syrian Arab army positions in order to justify the unjustifiable. They try to say that these are Iranian positions, but even if they were, they are still unjustified because the Iranian presence is legal and at the request of the Syrian army.
Dr. Marandi, as a Syrian journalist, I follow the reactions on social media outlets from the Syrian community, and I will be very honest with you. Some of the Syrians blame nowadays Iran for the Israeli attacks on Syria, and they say, were it not for the Iranian presence there, we wouldn't have witnessed all these attacks by Israel, which has become at least weekly basis. What's your take on this, and what is Iran doing to bolster the air defenses of Syria when Russia is apparently hesitant to take a decisive step against the Israeli aggressions on Syria, right? And there is a new report by Newsweek that says Iran actually and already installed sophisticated air defense systems in Syria, but this needs networking between the different Syrian air defenses and training, etc., etc. Is Iran delivering air defenses to Syria to help Syria repel the Israeli aggressions, or Iran isn't interested in doing that?
What I can say is that, in my opinion, when the time comes, when the Syrian government feels it necessary, when the Lebanese resistant feel it to be necessary in Lebanon, and in Gaza, when the resistance in Gaza feel it to be necessary, those weapons that have not been used so far to defend themselves will be used, and I think they are game changers. But the Iranian presence in Syria, as I said earlier, is at the request of the Syrian government. And if the Syrian government did not feel the need to have Iranian support, then the Iranians would leave. The Iranians, if the Syrian president, if the government felt that everything is safe and secure, then the Iranians would leave under, at the request of the Syrian government, just as they came in. But
that's a big thing to say, Dr. Marandi, because lots of people believe that Iran is there to stay, even if the situation calms down, even if Syria restores all its territories in the north, in the south, Al-Tanaf border crossing, even if the Americans withdraw. There are people, and I'm not talking about ordinary people, but analysts and those who work in think tanks, they say Iran is there to stay. And that's why they also believe that the Russian side is trying to balance the presence of the Iranian side in Syria.
No, I think it's quite clear that the Iranians have no ambitions in Syria. The Iranians do not have any military bases in Syria. You do not see in any part of the country where there is a military base, and the Syrian Arab army does not have access to it. The Iranians do not have boots on the ground where troops are on the streets. You know how that works, like in Iraq and in other countries. And if you wanted to have a military presence, you would have seen that in Iraq. The Iranians also sent very large numbers of troops to Iraq to defend the country against ISIS when it was falling. And after the Iraqi government stabilized, after the army and the Hashid became strong, the Iranians withdrew. And you don't see any Iranian troops in Iraq, even though Iraq is Iran's neighbor. And whereas the United States continues to have a military presence. The point is that I think that there's a lot of psychological warfare involved here. The United States, the Israelis, and their allies, they would like to see divisions between Iran, between Russia, between Syria, between the allies, in order to make Syria weak and make Syria vulnerable. After all, as we both mentioned earlier, you have an enormous occupation force in the north, the very same extremists that were slaughtering people a few years ago. You have the Americans working with the remnants of ISIS to the east of Syria, and the United States occupying enormous chunks of the country. And you have the Israeli regime to the south. And let us say hypothetically that all Iranians left the country. In fact, the Iranians shut down their embassy and everyone went home. And there's not a single Iranian, even an infant, even a schoolboy or schoolgirl in Syria. If the Israelis want to bomb Syria, they will bomb Syria and they will say that they bombed Iranian targets. Yes. And the Western media will say they were bombing Iranian targets. Have no doubt about that. That is how the Western media functions. That is how the Israeli regime functions. And many people will believe that there are Iranians in Syria when, hypothetically speaking, there's not a single person involved. So I think it's pretty clear that if you go down the streets of Damascus, you won't see any Iranian soldiers. You won't see Iranians involved in Syrian politics. The Syrian government is strong. It is sovereign. It makes its own decisions. And it wants both the Iranians and the Russians to continue to support it because the extremists and the Israeli regime, they are being supported by Syria's antagonists.
Dr. Marandi, the last question would be, things look good for Syria diplomatically. There is a Syrian-Saudi rapprochement, there is an Iranian-Saudi rapprochement happening, and a potential Syrian-Turkish deal with the mediation of Russia about Idlib and the north and the highway that connects between Aleppo and the coastal side. If all this rapprochement went well and the process is fruitful between these different sides, do you expect a voluntarily withdrawal of U.S. occupation forces from Syria, or Syria and its allies should put a military plan to push the American forces out of Syria by force?
That's a complicated question. I don't know the answer because I think it depends on many other factors as well. The United States is heavily invested in Ukraine. It is having a very negative impact on the strength of the United States, on the strength of Europe. We see these countries having great difficulty economically today. You also have heightened tensions over Taiwan and in the east of China and in the South China Sea and in the Pacific. So the United States has much less resources to deploy against the people of this region than before. And if the United States was thinking rationally, it would actually withdraw. But the United States is not thinking about the interests of the American people. It's thinking about the interests of the apartheid regime. So the United States is in Syria, and that's why the issue of the Iranian presence is irrelevant, because the United States and the Israeli regime will always attempt, or they will always try to make Syria weak. They want a broken Syria, they want a broken Lebanon, they want a broken Jordan, they want a broken Egypt, so that the Israeli regime can be they have total control over that part of West Asia. The Americans and the Europeans do not want a strong and united Syria. So Iran's presence in that regard is irrelevant. They will continue to undermine Syria whether the Iranians are here or not, but the Iranians and the Russians and others help prevent them from undermining Syria. And of course, first and foremost, is the people of Syria themselves, who were resilient in defending this country during the darkest days, especially in 2013, 14, and 15. But I do think that the United States is moving towards a very dangerous situation, economically speaking. It is biting off more than it can chew through these multiple interventions and these heightened tensions across the board. And whereas you have the rivals of the United States on the rise, and that includes countries like Iran and Iran's allies and other countries that the United States considers to be its adversaries. So it is going to be increasingly difficult for the United States to maintain this illegal and immoral and brutal occupation. And it will be increasingly difficult for the Israeli regime to continue with its brutal and ruthless acts of aggression against the people of Syria, who've endured so much at the hands of NATO, NATO's allies, and the Israeli apartheid regime.
Actually, I want to mention here before I end up this conversation that I asked also this question to Scott Ritter, and he said, why the United States invested so much in Syria? And he said it comes to Israel. And in my opinion, the U.S. is an empire, and a lot of people do not consider it an empire, but it's the perfect example of being an empire. And the history tells us that all empires, they go through a cycle. And the United States is now at the last stage, I would say, the last third of its empire as a power, as an empire power, and it's declining. And the only question is, will it decline peacefully, or will it collapse peacefully, or will it take all of us with the empire, with the nuclear Armageddon in Ukraine? And if people are serious and honest, and will see why the United States invested in Syria and elsewhere in the Middle East, and see the reason was about Israel and not the United States, a lot of people in the United States themselves, they will start asking questions, and these facts aren't presented, unfortunately, to the media. This was not in the strategic interests of the United States. It's not in Syria, not in Iraq, and not elsewhere in the Middle East. It was about Israel. And when we speak about these cases, we are accused of different things. I don't really care about that. This is my country, Syria. And I think this was a duty for the people in the region and to defend Syria, because next would have been also their turn. And I'm very thankful that Iran intervened in Syria at the request of the Syrian government. I know what happened in Syria. There were acts of genocide, acts of ethnic cleansing against different groups in Syria, including the Sunni majority in Syria. Many clerics, sheikhs, imams were murdered by these fanatics because for them, you are either with us or against us. And we have seen things that I myself, as a third-generation survivor of the Armenian genocide, we heard about these cases only from our grandparents. They told us stories that happened under the Ottoman Empire. And then we saw these things, these horrendous crimes on YouTube. And this was something that refreshed our memory, that this brutality, that we have to end it first physically, militarily, and then we have to bring economic prosperity to the region so that we can restore peace and stability for the people in the region. So, Dr. Mohammad Marandi, I'm really pleased and happy to chat with you today. You spoke to me, excuse me, I have a flu today. And probably Corona. I'm very happy to speak with you. You joined me from Damascus, and I will speak to you very soon again to follow up on this case.
Thank you very much for having me. I hope that you get well soon, and hopefully in the coming months, we will see better days for the people of Syria. We all stand by Syria. And the empire, as you rightly pointed out, it is an empire, seeks to divide us in order to weaken us. And the only way to defeat this menace is for us to ignore their propaganda, to cooperate with one another, and help build a better and brighter future for our children and the generations to come.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for your kind words, and we will see each other soon. Thank you very much, guys, for watching this show. I really appreciate that you tuned in, and I will put the link of Dr. Marandi's Twitter in the description. Please follow him. And also, if you want to support my independent journalistic work, please become a patron, link in the description below, and see you next time.